quote my grandmother, these are so easy to make that they're impossible to mess up. Welcome, my name is Zala and I am an art restorer who loves baking. I challenged myself to attempt all sweet recipes from my 1912 6th edition of Slovenska Kuharica. Hello everyone! Today we will be making plum dumplings. And this recipe is a little bit different because these do not have to be baked. And one of the reasons is that my oven broke down. And unlike most of the other recipes that I've made so far, which were basically conservation, restoration attempts to bring old forgotten recipes back to life, this one is very much still alive, because to this day my grandma makes these dumplings regularly and has ever since I was a child. At first I was hesitant to even include this recipe because my original mission was to bake all sweet recipes from this book, and I was honestly not sure if this one even qualifies. You might wonder why that might be, because it's sweet, no? But funnily enough, this recipe this dish I have never eaten as a dessert. This was always in our household served as the main dish, and dinners usually looked something like vegetable soup, and if you were a good child and ate the healthy part, then you got to enjoy the delicious golden sweet dumplings. And yeah, it was a good motivation for little Zala to get her veggies in. But talking to people around me, they actually agreed with me that they are not sure if this is a dessert or a main dish. So which one is it? And it turns out that it's actually both. To get a better picture, we have to look at Austrian and Southern Germanic-speaking regions in which Catholic Church had a very big influence, and they had enforced this 150 days of fasting throughout the year, and that was a lot. And if you look at it, meat is mostly replaced by fish, and not all people could afford fish that often, so they started to look for other alternatives. And these were starchy ingredients like potatoes, bread, flour, and a category of sweet dishes that were eaten as a main course was born, called Mehlspeise, which is an umbrella term that includes all of these starchy dishes like pancakes or strudel or these dumplings. And this was a standard practice under the Austrian influenced cuisine, under which also Slovenian culinary tradition belongs. We call these dishes močnate jedi, which is actually a little wider term because savory dishes are a part of these as well. But later, in 1900s, in Vienna, these simple peasant economic dishes got urbanized, and by this happening they became lighter, they became sweeter, and only then have these started to be viewed and consumed more as desserts. And if you look around in our country today, mostly these are categorized as sweet dishes, but a lot of people actually eat them as main dishes. And it's interesting because this daily inclusion in life is exactly what made them survive to this day, probably. For example, if my grandma would make these once a year, I doubt they would be such an important part of our lives, but she always made them in bulk, she froze them, and it was a very convenient weekday dish that was delicious and easy to make. You just took them out, boiled them, and served them. So yeah, I actually asked her how did she come by this recipe, and she told me that it was back when she was still working at the grocery store, and when she and the ladies had some time off, they always gathered around and shared recipes with each other. And that's how she learned this recipe and adopted it almost immediately because it was very convenient, tasty, and a very good way to use old starchy potatoes. And they also had a plum tree that she and my grandpa planted as they built this house. So they had a yearly supply of plums as well. And that very tree is very, very full with plums this year as well. So I am gonna be making my first attempt to make these dumplings this year. And let's look at what Miss Felicita has to say about this. Okay, here it is, Češpljevi Cmoki, or plum dumplings. It says that you should take 5 peeled and cooked potatoes. We're there already, aren't we? She doesn't say how big the potatoes should be. And the potatoes really do vary in size a lot. Oh boy. Okay. She says that you should put 1 egg in, 1 egg yolk, a little bit of raw butter, a little bit of salt, and that you should... What? That you should knead everything with a knife. I'm guessing my standard mixer will be up for the challenge as usual. And that you should mix until smooth and knead with a hand afterwards. Yeah, I was told by my grandmother that the dough should be quite firm. So I guess that's what I'll be looking for when making this, but I'm so doubtful because she does not tell me what kind of potato, what size the potatoes should be. Okay, afterwards it says that you should roll out the dough and that it has to be as thick as for thick noodles. God knows how much that is. And afterwards cut them up in squares, put 1 plum in the middle of each of those squares, take its pit out, take a sugar cube in. And that's exactly how my grandma described the process as well. And then you should roll it together and cook them in salty water for 7 minutes. Okay, I'm very happy that she told me exactly how long to cook them for. I'm not happy that she did not tell me if I should be putting them in cold water or boiling water, because that's a big difference. From my experience, when we have them frozen, I never ever made them fresh. I always have them frozen. I put them in the boiling water and wait for them to swim on the surface, and when they do, they're ready. This is the first time that I will be doing them fresh, and I really hope they won't just fall apart, but I will be putting them in boiling water, which I wouldn't know that I have to do if I wouldn't have this prior information. Okay, and then it says that, yeah, these are traditionally served with breadcrumbs toasted on butter, so this is exactly what she says that you have to do as well, and that you should just put dumplings in and coat them in these breadcrumbs. And okay, she also includes 3 other variations of this recipe. One is a bread roll instead of potatoes. In one she uses flour instead of potatoes, and in one she adds cheese to the flour. It's flour and cheese, but the plums stay from what I see. She doesn't specify that these are savory or anything, so we have, I guess, cheesy sweet plum dumplings. I have mixed feelings about this one. Maybe we'll get to it in some distant future, but for now, let's just leave it here as a curiosity. And here she also says that instead of plums, you can also use apricots or cherries to make different varieties. And yeah, my grandma actually, she mainly used plums, but she also from time to time used apricots when she was feeling like a little bit adventurous. And the last thing that Miss Felicita says is that you, in the winter, when you have no fresh fruits available, you can take dry, cooked, or steamed fruits instead. So, yeah. Let's make these, right? And to quote my grandmother, these are so easy to make that they're impossible to mess up, and somehow that makes me even more nervous. Let's get started. The first thing I had to do was to cook the potatoes, and the recipe didn't really tell me anything about how to do that. It didn't tell me if they should be cut, if they should be whole, if they should be peeled beforehand or no. So I just basically went by my own personal preference. I thought to myself, okay, maybe they will absorb less water if they are whole, and also I strongly prefer peeling them afterwards. But sadly, I forgot about them a little bit. So by the time I removed them from the stovetop, they were falling apart a little bit. But hey, at least I had an easier time peeling them. After that, I was met with the second question about how to approach this recipe, and that is that I didn't know if the potatoes should be cooled down completely, still hot, or what was I really supposed to do. And I decided that slightly warm probably makes most sense, because I didn't want them too hot so the eggs wouldn't curdle up, and I also didn't want them too cold so the butter would incorporate nicely. I left butter out so that it was room temperature, that it would have an easier time incorporating into the potatoes. And then I just added salt and started mixing them. I was contemplating mashing them first, but I thought to myself, my kitchen robot will probably do the job. But it turned out that the hook attachment that I used was a little too little for this, so I switched up to paddle attachment so that they would mash up properly, and they did. I was left with a nice puree with only an occasional little chunk here and there, which I didn't think would be bothersome. The book calls for 1/4 liter of flour, and as I was mixing it, I was trying to look for the texture that my grandma recommended, and that is that the dough should be quite firm. And at this point, I'll just add this flour counter here, and we'll get to that one later. Anyway, as I put the 200 grams inside and mixed it up properly, it was not firm at all. It was actually quite sticky. And I thought to myself, okay, let's add some more flour, and I decided to add it 50 grams by 50 grams so that I could stop at any point and really observe how the consistency changes, and to stop immediately as I get a working dough consistency. But it was not going anywhere. At this point, I even ran out of my own flour completely, and I had to go down and borrow from my mom. after all that, I was finally left with a workable dough, and let's just say that I was super worried about it, because even though it had a nice texture and it looked workable enough, the flour potato ratio had to be so far off from anything that this recipe imagined as it was written, that I had really no idea how this will react when cooked afterwards. But it was time to move on and prepare the plums to put in the dumplings. I had to deep-heat all of them, and they were still a bit on the earlier side, so I was hoping that them being not as sweet as they could be won't affect the recipe that much. The recipe calls for 1 sugar cube into each of the plums, but since they were on the smaller side, I opted to put each sugar cube in half so that the plums wouldn't get overwhelmed by the sugar. The dough ended up behaving quite nicely, and I had no trouble rolling it out, even though I had a feeling that maybe it is a little bit on the elastic side. I wasn't sure also how thick exactly I should be rolling it, because I do not know how thick the thick noodles that Miss Felicita references should be. I just did it by feeling and made a test dumpling to see if the thickness of the dough and the size of the squares works for the size of these plums. And yes, I was left with a cute little dumpling, so decided that that will do, and continued to make the dumplings from the rest as well. Out of curiosity, I asked my grandmother if her mom ever made this for her family when she was a child, and she said that sadly no, because they were a very large family. They lived on the farmhouse, so there was also a lot of work to do. So it was completely unrealistic for her mother to make these individual dumplings for all 13 of them, or I think at least that there were 13 of them, because, you know, every child eats about 2 dumplings at least next to a filling soup beforehand, and it was just too much work for her. So usually when she cooked for them, my grandma remembers eating mostly dishes from cabbage, a lot of cornmeal, and every day they had bread. They always had white coffee to drink, but desserts like this or that were pieced individually were not as common. So I went on to ask which desserts they actually did eat, and she said that she recalls them eating walnut roll every holiday. And that's interesting because my grandma still keeps on this tradition of making walnut roll every single holiday. And for maškare, for example, that is I don't even know how that is translated in Slovene. It's when you dress up like for Halloween, but it's in the spring to chase away winter. Anyway, for that holiday, her mother always made flancati. This is similar to donuts, but shaped a little bit differently. But other than that she would not make desserts as such at all. So these dumplings were actually really first tried out by my grandmother, making her the one that started this tradition in our house. By the time I finished rolling up the last dumpling, I was left with so many of them, because I don't think the recipe intended for me to put so much flour in, so I'm pretty sure I ended up with triple the amount of dumplings that the recipe thought I was gonna be left with. So I froze a little bit, and I only made as many as I thought that we will be able to eat in one dinner sitting. And now it was the moment of truth. Are these dumplings gonna fall apart when cooking or no? And I was really grateful to the exact directions from Felicita that this should be cooked for 7 minutes. I knew that they are done when they swim to the surface, but I was nonetheless happy that I had a time approximation of how long that would take. And while they were cooking, I melted the butter and toasted the breadcrumbs, in which I was supposed to roll the cooked dumplings. And I was so happy that they actually remained firm and together. Not a single dumpling fell apart while cooking. And they really did look delicious. For this amount of dumplings, I took 75 grams of butter and 75 grams of breadcrumbs, but to be honest, it would have probably been enough if I would just use 50 grams of each. After I coated every single dumpling sufficiently, it was time to sprinkle them with sugar and with a little bit of cinnamon, and finally try them out and see how they look on the inside. Right, I forgot that I cut this one open with a knife.
Lucky bastard.
They're tough.
They're very dry. It's a dry feeling.
The taste of the dough is nice. I wouldn't say that it's anything different. I'm not used to pairing them with cinnamon though, so I didn't. Oh yeah, actually I did. I'm sorry. This one is with cinnamon.
Oh.
Yeah, she says that I should do that. I actually took them out just now for my grandma and my mother to try, and they said that they're okay, that they're tougher than we're used to, but that they're tasty.
No, they are.
If they would get this in a restaurant, they wouldn't go like, oh my god, they make them so horrible here. They would be like, oh, okay, this is just tougher than we're used to. That's it. It's still there.
They're not bad. They're okay. They're the same, basically the same as we always eat, even in my home. It's just the breadcrumbs kind of.
Oh, but you don't like breadcrumbs by default, right?
Yeah, it doesn't add anything for me. It detracts.
Okay.
This one's with cinnamon.
And?
It's actually pretty good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You like the combination?
Yeah, I do.
But yeah, this is the first time in my life that I have actually toasted the breadcrumbs properly. I usually underdo them, even when I do it with pasta, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are very light and almost, non-existent. And now I really went for it, and it shows because there's a whole crust around them.
Yeah.
For you, it should probably be just like sprinkled with it, but
At least sprinkled or not at all. Yeah, it's
yeah, I'm sorry that I didn't do some like that and some like that.
It's fine. It's you're following the recipe. It's what Felicita would have wanted.
But I like that, it's what it should be on the inside, like the juices spill out, and the plums are just sweet enough, I'd say.
You
What?
like cinnamon too?
Yes, I do.
No, the plums are actually fine.
Is there anything else that we want to say about this, except that my grandma makes them better?
Every
Obviously.
grandma makes it better. Yours especially. Yes, I'm looking at you.
Hey.
Okay. Criminal behavior.
We still have to rate them.
Do it. They're normal for a. I never thought about rating them before.
Okay, so if my grandmother's are 9 out of 10 because I have not yet tasted a perfect dumpling, I guess.
She hasn't tasted my grandmother's dumplings.
Are they perfect? Okay.
They're the same.
But yeah, I guess this would be a 7 because they're tasty but could be more properly made.
Yeah.
Well, let's get to our dumpling new edition comparison. Plum dumplings. Here it says you need potato dough. So, potato dough. It says that you should take 1 kilo of potatoes. That's nice. They put in exact amount. And we actually ended up using 850 because I took the average weight of a medium potato and went with that. And 60 grams of fat, which is way more than what we used. It only stated a small amount, so I went with 25. For better or worse, it says 2 eggs, so that's about the same flour to egg ratio, and 350 grams of flour, which is actually surprising because the ratio of flour versus potatoes is roughly the same as what Miss Felicita told us to do. But remember that super runny dough from the beginning of the video? Well, it turns out that Miss Felicita and, for the matter of fact, Miss Bernarda both forget to mention one really important thing, that the potatoes should be old and starchy, because I used young potatoes. Also, what the problem is that no one said to me how they should be cooked, that you should take really extra care for the extra water not to get into them. And from what I see here, this one doesn't specify further how they should be cooked: whole, cut, peeled, unpeeled. So no one warns you. And okay, in this recipe it actually tells you that you should be mixing butter and egg in while still hot, and flour in after it already cools down. And oh wow, you should replace some of the flour with wheat meal, which is nice because that one is even more absorbent. So I'm guessing that this acts as a little bit of a safeguard if the potatoes are a little bit on the wetter side. And it also warns you that you shouldn't be over mixing it, and that if you let it stand for a while, that it might become watery. But I find it really curious, considering that these recipes in the newer edition get more specific compared to the older ones, that they still don't include any details about the potatoes themselves, the age, the way of cooking. So I'm guessing that one only experience can teach us. And now about how we should actually be making these dumplings. It says plums, same amount of butter and breadcrumbs. That's exactly the same thing that we did, half ratio. Sugar, cinnamon, and okay, this actually these instructions tell you to make out a long roll of dough and just cut it up into individual pieces, flatten each one, put the plum, put the sugar, wrap them up, and that's it. So the rolling technique is different, and they also add 1 minute to the cooking. I'm guessing that that's to safeguard against someone making like thicker dumplings and that they are cooked through for sure. It's interesting because it would make sense to me to add into the directions the tip about them being done as they swim to the surface, and there is no mention of that either in the old version or in this one. Okay, and then basically just roll them around in breadcrumbs, and that plums can be replaced by apricots. And just out of curiosity, I looked at this boy as well. This is my notebook from the pastry school that I went to, and there is no recipe for plum dumplings, and I think that goes to show that these are still not that widely considered a dessert, that we weren't even taught about them in school. So all in all, the dumplings that we made, I think they came out nice, considering that I was making them for the first time. The plums were juicy, they were flavorful, the breadcrumbs coated them nicely, added nice texture, nice taste, but they were a little bit tough and a little bit dry. And if I would have more information about the potatoes, I think that would have made a big difference. So if you decide making these at home, please don't use the one flour to potato ratio that I ended up using. Just take better potatoes and don't get them too wet, and the original flour potato ratio should probably work. And yeah, that's it on these dumplings. Thank you for staying through this episode with me, and for the next week we're gonna be using plums again, and I think we are gonna tackle another pogača. So stay with me to see how that one turns out. Have fun. Bye.